Graham Whitaker, a 45-year-old millionaire, sat alone in the living room lit only by the Christmas tree in his Boston townhouse, staring at the rug like it was a boxing ring. On the outside, he looked like a man in full control. On the inside, he carried an old terror, trusting someone again and paying a high price for it. On Christmas Eve, that fear spoke louder than his common sense. So he came up with the worst test of his life. He would fake a collapse right in front of his own kids and the new nanny, just to see who would really stay. Only his body didn't stick to the script, and when he actually blacked out for real, the silence in that rich house was filled with a sound he never expected to hear there. Before I tell you what he saw when he woke up 2 hours later, tell me in the comments, from where are you watching this story? City, state, or country? Graham Whitaker had the kind of fortune that made people smile before they even knew why. But that cold Boston night, inside his immaculate Beacon Hill townhouse, he stood in the dark kitchen staring at his own reflection in the window like it belonged to someone else. Outside, neighbors' Christmas lights blinked, pretty and irritating at the same time. Inside, the loudest sounds were the tick of the clock and the heater humming. Christmas Eve was just days away, and Graham had everything, except the desire to celebrate. His pain didn't come from lack. It came from too much, too many memories, too much shame, too much distrust. The betrayal hadn't been just an affair. It had been an operation. His ex-wife, the woman he'd shared a bed and dreams with, and his business partner, the man who shook his hand in every meeting, had tried to gut the company from the inside. There was no movie-style screaming. There were contracts, closed-door meetings, that sick moment when you realize you've been smiling at someone who already decided to destroy you. Graham won the fight on paper, took back control of the business, but lost a part of his mind that never shut off again. From then on, he raised the twins, Evan and Leela, like someone guarding a vault. He truly loved them, not a speech kind of love, but the kind that gets you out of bed at 3 a.m. because you heard a cough down the hall. But he trusted no one around them. Nannies came and went like hotel temps, 2 weeks, a month, sometimes less. Graham blamed standards, but the ugly truth was simpler. He hunted for flaws before flaws could hunt him. Evan had learned to watch his father's face before laughing. Leela sometimes rehearsed a hug and stopped halfway, afraid of doing too much. The house was luxurious, spotless, smelling of pine and polish, but warmth was missing from the air. When someone showed affection to the kids, Graham didn't relax. His jaw tightened. When someone seemed too good, his stomach turned. That week, the agency called again, insisting on a different candidate. Graham almost refused on autopilot. He was tired of interviews, tired of trained smiles, tired of people saying the right thing in the right tone still. He scheduled it, not out of hope, out of exhaustion. And even before the new nanny set foot in the house, he'd already decided one thing. No one would get near his family as hot without climbing his walls first. And those walls were high enough to hurt anyone who tried. Out in the world, Graham was the kind of man who always looked composed. Perfect suit, low voice, polite to just the right degree. But inside his home, the week of Christmas, he turned into something else, a radar on full alert, hunting for a danger no one else saw. He didn't call it paranoia. He called it being careful. That Beacon Hill townhouse, decorated with pine gardens, tasteful ribbons, and warm lights, felt more like a beautiful bunker than a home. His routine followed rules that weren't written anywhere, but everyone felt them. No unlocked doors, no unexpected visitors, No improvising. He checked the cameras on his phone like other people check bank alerts. If he heard a laugh that sounded too loud, he'd casually appear in the hallway. If Evan and Leila mentioned a nanny's name with too much excitement, he'd ask one extra question, glance at his watch, change the subject. It wasn't jealousy. It was terror that they'd get attached and then be crushed the way he had been. Graham had a bitter talent, testing people without them realizing it. He'd change a tiny detail in the plan and watch how they reacted. He'd leave an instruction a little vague on purpose, just to see if someone would take advantage. He'd retell the same story with a line altered, to find out if the nanny repeated it later. It was an ugly, silent game he justified with one sentence. Once was enough. But the game didn't just punish nannies. It poisoned the whole house. On Wednesday of that week, it became obvious. Leila spilled hot chocolate on the living room rug and immediately burst into tears, already sure her dad would explode. Evan rushed in, grabbed a napkin, and started dabbing at the stain with a trembling hand. The nanny at the time, already finishing her notice period, said in a normal tone, "Hey, it's okay. It was just an accident." Graham heard and came in, calm to calm. He looked at the rug, looked at the kids, looked at the nanny. "You left her alone with the mug." The question was soft, but sliced. The nanny flushed and explained. The kids shrank. Graham never raised his voice. He just sucked the warmth out of the room. When he went back upstairs, the silence turned heavy. Evan glanced at his sister like he was apologizing for existing. Leila stopped crying in a strange way, not because the sadness passed, but because she'd learned emotions had a limit there. Graham had no idea he was teaching his kids to breathe quietly. To him, this was protection. That same night, the agency texted. The new candidate could start before Christmas if he liked her at the interview. Graham didn't feel relieved. He felt disturbed, like someone was about to press on the one spot he'd worked so hard to hide. In the end, he replied, "Bring her tomorrow," not because he trusted her, but because he wanted to look this different person in the eye and find the flaw. The problem: sometimes the flaw isn't in the one who arrives. It is in the one who can accept that someone might actually come with clean hands. The next afternoon, a cold drizzle gave the street that winter shine, and the Christmas lights in the windows looked even brighter against the wet brick. Graham opened the door with his usual posture, shoulders square, steady gaze, controlled tone, and found a woman holding a plain folder. No heavy makeup, no exaggerated smile. She introduced herself calmly. Maya Bennett, 32, soft voice, low-key posture. Her coat was simple, her boots clearly worn. Nothing about her was trying to impress. For some reason, that irritated Graham more than outright show-off behavior. The interview took place in the living room near the tastefully decorated tree. Graham noticed that Maya didn't keep scanning the expensive details of the house. She looked at the kids. Evan and Leila hovered at the top of the stairs, peeking down, half wary, half curious. Maya didn't wave theatrically or call them sweethearts like she'd known them forever. She just gave a small smile and said, "Hi, I'm Maya, simple." Leila squeezed her brother's hand but didn't back away. Evan tilted his head, intrigued. Graham saw it and felt his stomach tighten, like a thread inside him had just been tugged. He led with his usual questions: schedules, discipline, rules, privacy, cameras. Maya answered clearly, without rushing and without over-defending herself. When he asked why she'd moved so much in recent years fishing for a gap, she told him the truth without drama. She'd cared for a sick relative for a while, then looked for steady work, then decided to start over. She didn't try to sound heroic. She didn't sell her suffering. Graham wanted to spot a lie in that quiet tone and found nothing. So he turned up the pressure. "You understand this isn't a typical home," he said, nodding toward the wide room, the discreet cameras, the curated silence. Maya nodded. "I do. But with all due respect, kids are still kids. They don't do well in a display case." The line wasn't aggressive, but it hit hard. Graham felt like she'd called out his behavior without naming it. He was ready to snap back, to end the interview there. But from the stairs, Evan whispered, "Dad, she seems nice." It was barely audible, but it cut right through him. On the first day, Maya didn't make grand gestures. She helped Lila pick a sweater, put soft music on while fixing lunch, asked Evan what his favorite show was without pretending she loved it too. When Lila pouted because she wanted dessert before eating, Maya crouched to eye level and said, "I know you want it. Here's the deal. Lunch first. Then you pick one thing. Deal, no yelling. No guilt trip." Lila tested her with a defiant stare, and for the first time in a long time, someone held the boundary without giving in or shaming her. Graham watched from a distance, as always. But this time it felt different. It wasn't a hunt for immediate mistakes. It was discomfort. The kids were starting to relax. Evan laughed out loud once, really loud, and his laughter filled the kitchen. Lila grabbed Maya's hand to show her a drawing. Graham's old reflex kicked in, the urge to step in, to control, to cut things off before they grew. He reached the hallway and stopped. He saw Maya sitting on the floor with the twins, listening like she actually had time. That simple presence started to scramble something inside him. That night, when Maya left, Evan asked if she'd be back tomorrow. Graham said yes too quickly, too curtly. He went up to his office and watched the tree through the second-floor window. Its lights reflected in the glass. Everything should have felt perfect. Nothing out of place, nothing suspicious, nothing wrong. Yet the kids' newfound peace triggered an old fear, the fear of attachment, of trust and loss. As the house slowly began to feel alive again, Graham came up with an idea that sounded reasonable in his head. But in reality, it might turn into the cruelest thing he'd ever done. The closer Christmas got, the prettier the house became, and the more agitated Graham felt. The lights from the tree shimmered on the dark furniture. The garlands scented the air with pine, and still he moved through the rooms like he was walking on glass. Evan and Lila began to wait for Maya's arrival with a kind of enthusiasm kids can't hide, and instead of easing in, it tightened something deep inside. It wasn't jealousy. It was panic at watching affection grow, imagining the crash if it disappeared. He kept telling himself this was just being responsible, but there was one detail he couldn't ignore. Maya didn't seem to be acting. She didn't force laughter, didn't throw fake compliments, didn't try to win him over. She came, did her job, cared for the kids with quiet consistency, and left without leaving fingerprints on his life. And that, more than anything, made him suspicious. Because in his mind, after Harper and Gavin, nothing was simply good. No one was simply stable. Affection was always a tool in someone's hand. At night, after the kids were asleep, Graham turned into a detective of his own pain. He rewound camera footage, watched scenes twice, studied small gestures, a pause, a look, a hand near a pocket. He searched her name like he was hunting for a crime. No scandals, no scams. Nothing. And that didn't bring him peace. It made him more uneasy. The lack of flaws looked, to him, like a flaw well hidden. His brain preferred a clear lie to a simple truth. That's when the bad idea was born. Not as some comic book villain plan, but as a precaution he convinced himself was necessary. On Christmas Eve, when the house would be quiet and Maya would be in the living room with the kids, he would fake a collapse, just for a few minutes, long enough to see what she'd do when she thought no one was watching. Would she panic and call someone he didn't know? Run? Try to handle it in some strange way? And above all, how would she treat Evan and Lila in that kind of scare? Graham told himself this was for the kids' safety. But deep down, it was about his own fear. When Christmas Eve arrived, the city outside seemed more muted, like Boston was holding its breath. The living room was lit only by the tree and the low fire in the fireplace. Graham stood for a moment at the top of the stairs, listening to the kids' voices downstairs with Maya. He walked down slowly, feeling the soft rug under his feet, picked a spot where he could fall without getting hurt, and for 1 second, he hesitated, as if his conscience were trying to pull him back. But he swallowed that hesitation and let himself drop, giving in to his need for control. What Graham didn't know was that, with his eyes closed, he was about to hear something in that room that didn't sound like panic at all, and that would shake him in a way no test could have predicted. Graham hit the rug exactly as planned. Controlled thud, heavy body, breathing slowed the way he thought he could think. Inside his head, he counted the seconds. Now she'll run. Now she'll scream. Now she'll grab her phone and call someone. But the first sound wasn't a scream. It was a short, dense pause, followed by Maya's voice, low and steady, as she took charge without throwing the room into chaos. "Evan, Lila, come here with me. Now." It wasn't harsh. It was the kind of call kids obey without fear. With his eyes closed, Graham felt quick footsteps on the rug, heard the kids' breathing pick up, and felt Maya's hand check his pulse. She didn't shake him, didn't panic, didn't put on a show. She checked him like someone who'd seen real scares before. He's breathing. He's cold. But he's breathing. Her voice broke in places, but it didn't shatter. Leela started crying softly, holding it back like she didn't want to be a problem. Evan went rigid, trying to be strong without knowing how. And then Maya did something Graham had never expected, something no test could have staged. She didn't turn their dad into a task. She turned that moment into shelter for them. She pulled the twins toward the couch, knelt with them on the rug, and said, "We're going to do something together. Okay, our way. No screaming. No letting fear run wild. Hold my hand." Graham felt their small hands link, felt their warmth, and heard Maya take a deep breath. She didn't pray like someone performing faith for an audience. She prayed like someone who knew what silence felt like. "God, please, take care of him right now. Take care of his heart, his body, and take care of these kids, because they don't deserve to be scared in their own home." Leela sniffled and squeezed harder. Evan whispered a barely audible please, lying there with his face in the rug. Graham felt a hot wave of shame rise through him. Like someone had turned on a light inside his chest. The plan was to stay down a few minutes, then wake up, collect his observations, and file them away as evidence. But as he listened to that prayer, his body reacted in a way he hadn't planned. His breathing grew heavy, his chest tightened, his heart raced, as if it couldn't tell the difference between pretend and real danger. Panic, The kind he usually controlled became physical. For a second he wanted to jump up and say it was a test, but his vision tunneled behind his eyelids. The fake faint turned into real weakness. He actually blacked out, for real this time, with Maya's voice in his ears saying to the kids, "Stay here. I'm right here. We're not leaving him." The hours crawled by while the living room stayed in vigil mode. Maya covered him with a blanket, set a glass of water nearby, checked his temperature with what she had, and kept the kids close without letting fear spiral. Instead of running round making noise and chasing attention, she held the house together from the inside, somehow understanding that, for Evan and Lila, more than an ambulance in that moment, they needed not to see their dad disappear into chaos. Sometimes she prayed softly. Other times she just sat, hand on their shoulders, helping time pass with the least pain possible. When Graham's breathing finally shifted and his body signaled he was coming back, Maya leaned near his face and whispered something more human than religious. "Come back. They're here." Evan and Lila were still on their knees, exhausted, eyes swollen, fingers intertwined like that was the only thing holding the world in place. Graham opened his eyes slowly, and what he saw wasn't panic, greed, or indifference. It was a small circle of love, faith, and stubborn care in the middle of a wealthy room, and in that instant, he knew exactly who had been exposed by this test. Not Maya, him. When Graham fully opened his eyes, the first thing he registered was the flicker of the tree lights in the corner, reflected in the glass ornaments like tiny flames. The second was the heaviness in his own body, like he'd run miles without moving. The third, the one that really hurt, was seeing Evan and Lila still kneeling, leaning against each other, hands joined with Maya's, locked in that quiet ritual of hope. Lila's face was streaked with dried tears. Evan looked tired for his age. Maya, though clearly exhausted, held herself steady, like she'd decided no one was going to fall apart alone. Graham tried to speak, but his throat scraped. Maya noticed immediately. She grabbed the water, guided it into his hand, and said, slowly, "Just breathe." There was no accusation in her voice. No "I told you so." No lecture. That made everything worse. Graham had expected, deep down, to find something he could use to justify his distrust. Instead, he found the exact opposite. Someone who could have exploded in anger and chose to stay. Evan moved first. He stepped closer with that kid courage that grows out of fear and touched his father's arm. "Dad, are you here?" The question was simple and devastating. It wasn't about health. It was about presence. Lila didn't say a word. She just pressed her forehead against the rug and cried again, softly, like she was trying not to take up space. Graham felt guilt swell inside him, big as the room. He tried to sit up. Maya helped with quick, practiced hands. Then he looked at the three of them like a man about to confess a crime, which, in a way, he was. I need to tell you something." His voice was rough, stripped of the boardroom authority he usually carried. This didn't happen the way it looked. Maya stayed still, watching. The twins stared, confused. Graham drew in a breath, and his usual pride, the thing that always came to his rescue, simply didn't show up. I faked it. I did this as a test. The silence that followed felt so heavy it seemed even the heater stopped humming. Evan blinked, trying to fit the pieces together. A test. Why? Lila lifted her face, eyes full. Not angry yet, just deeply hurt. Graham's cheeks burned. "Because I don't know how to trust anymore. I thought if I saw how you react, Maya, I'd have certainty." He glanced at the kids, and his voice cracked. "And I didn't think about what it would do to you too." Maya finally spoke, and Graham braced himself to lose her then and there. He was ready for a speech, ready to be crushed. But she didn't shout. "You did something cruel," she said, clear and calm. "But I understand where it comes from." Graham looked up, stunned by the honesty. "I've seen the way they hold their breath when you walk into a room," she continued. "I've seen the way you always look like you're waiting for a hit. That doesn't come from nowhere. But if you really want to take care of them, you have to stop turning love into an exam." Graham dropped his head. Not from the shame of being caught, from the shame of being that man at all. He whispered, "I am sorry," that sounded far too small for the damage he'd done. Evan didn't run into his arms yet. Leela didn't either. They stayed where they were, wrestling with the idea that a dad can love you and still scare you. Maya stepped a little closer and lowered her voice. "Now it's your choice," she said. "You can keep living like everyone's about to betray you, or you can learn to trust knowing it might hurt." Before Graham could answer, the house made ordinary noises, a crack from the fireplace, rain against the windows, as if to remind them that the night was moving on. He realized something. Sorry wasn't enough. He would have to prove himself in a different way. Before this Christmas was over, he'd have to decide whether to keep the walls up or finally let someone in. Graham sat on the couch like someone who'd just seen his own soul from the outside. No more arguments. No more performance. He looked at the twins and saw the fear still clinging to them. Evan stayed close but didn't lean in, gripping the arm of the sofa too tightly. Leela curled up in a corner, hugging her knees, sometimes staring at her father like she was trying to decide if he was safe or just unpredictable. Then Graham did something he almost never did. He asked for help without giving orders. He turned toward the hall and called Maya's name in a low, uncertain voice. I don't know how to fix this." Just that sentence sounded like it had been ripped out of him. Maya didn't answer with a lecture. She looked at the kids first and said quietly, "We're going to go slow. One step at a time." She stood, went to the kitchen, and started cooking something simple with whatever was on hand. Because, truth be told, that gorgeous house had always depended on other people to actually function. Soon, the smell of warm food filled downstairs. It wasn't a feast, wasn't a glossy magazine Christmas. It was ordinary, and that's exactly why it was powerful. Maya set the table with everyday plates. No ceremony, and called the twins first. "Come on, just sit. If you don't want to talk, don't." Evan dragged his chair over. Leela came last, hesitant, like any wrong move could trigger danger. Graham hovered in the doorway, hands in his pockets, unsure whether he had the right to sit with them. He finally took a seat, slower than usual. Before anyone lifted a fork, he spoke again, looking straight at his kids. "I messed up badly." His voice shook, but he didn't run from the words. "I thought I was protecting you, and I ended up scaring you instead." Evan fiddled with his fork, eyes down. Leela stayed quiet, but what she did next hit harder than any shout. She gently pushed a small piece of bread toward her dad inch by inch like it was her own test. "Are you going to ruin this too?" Graham's chest tightened. He picked up the bread carefully, as if it might break. As they ate, the twins began to relax almost against their will. Like their bodies remembered that a table can be a safe place. Maya told a silly story about the time she burned a batch of cookies as a teenager, and Evan let out a quick little laugh. Leela, without noticing, leaned her shoulder into his. Graham didn't cut in. He didn't get up to check on something. He stayed put, present, enduring the discomfort of not controlling every second. For the first time in a long time, the house felt less perfect and more alive. Later that same night, Graham went back to the living room and looked at the tree, at the rug where he'd fallen. The shame washed over him again. He called Maya into the doorway and spoke quietly, almost afraid of the words, "I don't want to be this man anymore." Maya didn't minimize what he'd done, but she didn't flee either. Then start with something simple. She said, "Stop testing what you claim to love." Graham nodded, eyes tired more than teary. When he returned to the couch, Ivan and Lila were cold under a blanket watching a cartoon with the sound low. Graham sat at the edge, keeping his distance. Lila looked over at him and, after a very long pause, reached out her small hand and wrapped two of his fingers in hers. Just that. It wasn't much. It was everything. Graham didn't squeeze hard. He just held on gently, as if he were learning how to touch without gripping. And in that exact moment, he understood. The next step wasn't some grand promise. It was a choice, starting now, to stop pushing people away with cruel tests and to start showing up, day after day, as the father his kids already desperately wanted him to be. That Christmas Eve, Graham didn't receive a pretty lesson. He was shoved into a second chance. He tried to prove the truth with a test and ended up discovering it in the simplest way. Real love stays, even when no one is watching. And you, what would you have done in his place? Would you have walked away after a stunt like that? Or would you have stayed for the kid's sake? Tell me in the comments what hit you hardest. The fake faint, the prayer on the living room floor, or the little hand holding his fingers at the end. If this story held you to the end, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Stories that don't just entertain, but remind us of something deep. Protecting yourself at all costs can cost you the very people you were trying to keep safe.